All right. Everyone settled? Good morning, everybody, and thank you for bearing with us. In the last 48 hours, we have heard a lot about the rape gang scandal and about a national inquiry. And what I want to do this morning is bring some light where there's been a lot of heat. What we haven't heard very much of is the survivors' views. Survivors and their families have gone through hell to get here, and I think that they've been ignored for far too long. So what this morning is about is not the politics, but giving them a platform to say what they want to see from a national inquiry. And I'll start by saying how much we welcome Baroness Casey's report and the recommendation for a national inquiry. This is something that we've been very vocal on in the House of Commons, and we're really glad that we finally got to this place. And I think it's important to reiterate why we want a national inquiry. It's not just because we believe this is still ongoing. It is because so much activity has taken place. 2014, 2015, 2018, local inquiries and investigations launched by the Home Office, independent reports, independent inquiries, a gangs task force as recently as 2023, finding about 807 perpetrators and 4,000 victims just last year. This is what made me decide that a national inquiry was critical, that no one has joined the dots, that the scale of this is much bigger than any of us envisaged, even as we were looking at this. And we need a national inquiry and criminal investigations, not just to look at the perpetrators, but where there was institutional failure. This is work that has not been done. Chris is going to talk about the elements that we believe are needed in order to make the inquiry a success. But most importantly, I want to hear today from the survivors and their families. And I will introduce them one by one. Very much to my left, we have Lucia, who has been a campaigner and an advocate for survivors. She's been a great help, a great voice for many people who haven't been able to speak for themselves. So Lucia is speaking as a campaigner and an advocate. She has been a campaigner and an advocate for Teresa Smith. Teresa's son was abused and very sadly has since passed away. She is pursuing justice for her son. So she will be speaking without prejudice because there is a live court case, I believe, on this issue. So she will be speaking without prejudice to that court case. But she also wants to talk about how it's not just girls who are abused, but boys. That's something that isn't spoken about enough. Fiona is a brave survivor who I spoke to last month. We had a good interview, but what's really special about what she did was waiving her anonymity. It's very difficult for a lot of people to come out and speak about what happened. And Fiona, you've been unbelievably brave. Many people would have seen the interviews you've given on so many news channels. I think you were on Newsnight just last night. So thank you for doing that. You're incredibly brave. And finally, Marlon West. Marlon is the father of Scarlett, who is also a survivor. And he spoke to me about the horrific experience he had as a parent trying to intervene and was not listened to by the authorities. He is more than a concerned father. He has been a lead campaigner for a national inquiry. So why don't I start with you, Marlon? What do you want to see from an inquiry?
So, again, I think there's more questions than answers, even after Yvette Cooper discussed the inquiry yesterday. One of my main concerns is around locally led inquiry. So if that's locally led, are we back to the same argument that local authorities are going to be questioning, they're going to be answering their own homework? One of my major concerns throughout this, don't get me wrong, I'm really angry with the groomers, but what I am angry with is the social workers and the police, the ones who didn't protect her, the ones what I was screaming at, asking them to support me, because I held my hands up. It was so difficult at the time that I couldn't look after my own daughter. I was a single parent on my own, and social services got me suspended from work for trying to keep my daughter in the house. It was so difficult. So one of my big things out of this inquiry is about holding professionals accountable, and that doesn't reassure me one little bit. Also, the other thing what Vet was saying is criminal prosecutions for under 16s. So Scarlett was groomed from 14 to 18. From 16 to 18 was possibly the worst time where she was being really trafficked around the country. So from 16 to 18, does that not matter? Is there not going to be any prosecutions around that? Because what people don't understand is the groomers, it might start off with one groomer, but by the end of it, it's a completely different grooming gang. They, I guess, they sell them on to other gangs. So that really concerns me. Let's see what happens, I guess.
Thank you, Marlon. I know this is very difficult for you
to
speak about, and I'm really grateful that you're here just making sure that Scarlett and so many other girls like her just have a voice. So thank you.
Just the final one. I speak to a lot of survivors all over the country. I speak to a lot of parents. They have no trust in the police or social services. For example, with Scarlett's in the Baird Review, which was an investigation into the handling of how women, their words, women and girls are treated. My argument is it should have been women and children. Scarlett's a child in that. She was strip searched after being missing for 2 weeks and being systematically raped. And that was done as a punishment to stop her from going missing. There was no sexual gratification within that. So how are these girls going to come forward?
I think that's a really good point. And it's something, I think, Fiona, that you've also talked about as well, just that trust and encouraging so many survivors to come forward. Do you want to tell us what you would like to see from an inquiry?
Yeah, so firstly, I wanted to say that I think all the political stuff needs to be put aside now. This needs to be focused on survivors, and the government need to do a lot of work to rebuild up trust from services and for the victims to be able to trust to come forward, to be able to open up and be able to engage in an inquiry, because without the engagement then we're just not going to get anywhere. So that is the responsibility now of the government to be putting active stuff in place now to fix things that are bridges that have been broken through systematic failures for years and years. Then I do also want to talk about the fact that while this inquiry is ongoing, I think it is important to acknowledge that work cannot stop on tackling the crime in the here and now. And I would encourage there to be some conversations about survivor-led education within schools and services so we can start tackling and preventing this crime from happening while the inquiry is ongoing. We need to be addressing both sides of this issue. There is a responsibility to fix damage that has been done to so many people across the country, but there is also a responsibility to protect future people, and we shouldn't be choosing either or either. We need to be focusing on both of it. And I would encourage victims to come forward, because even though we have been failed so majorly for so long, together we can do this. We can make a difference. Without people speaking up and suffering in silence, things will never change, and people hopefully can have the courage to start speaking up and coming forward and fighting for their own justice.
Thank you, Fiona. I know this is not easy, and I'm really grateful for what you're doing today. I know you're particularly concerned about delays, and this was because you had to wait quite a while for your case. So when you make the point about things happening alongside, can you just go into a bit more detail about what specifically you mean? Because you told me a bit more.
So I think it's important to be educating children, not just on how to spot the warning signs of becoming a victim, but also on how to spot the warning signs of the criminal exploitation from the men that are grooming other young children to become groomers. We need to be focusing on the whole picture, and that needs to be going on alongside convictions, and there needs to be support put in place for people throughout all this process. People are too often left on their own, and it's a lot for any one person to deal with. During my trial, my hair fell out and I ended up having to walk around bald because of the stress it put me through, and the fact that I couldn't have no help or support during that time, and people had to come and take pictures of my bald head to be put into the court documents and stuff like that, and there wasn't enough support there to help people through this process. It is such a traumatic experience, and there needs to be a lot of look at that situation going forward.
Thank you, Fiona. And once again, I have to say just how brave you are to tell this story, because many people don't understand how the trauma continues much long after the incidents themselves. So I'm very grateful, and these are some of the things that we will continue to push for to make sure that the inquiry looks at the whole picture. Teresa,
yeah,
could you tell us what you would like to see from an inquiry, and a little bit about your background and how you've come to be here?
I'd like openness, transparency, like more help for the survivors, because there's nothing there, and more help for the families of survivors, because we're just left with nothing. We're here to pick up the pieces, and we're left with no support. And a lot of people don't think that parents should even be involved. But in my case, my son isn't here to represent himself. And what kind of mother would I be if I didn't, you know, be here and carry on the fight for him? He was just 13 when the abuse started. It was a paedophile ring. I did tell the social workers and the police, and basically I was told, if you don't stop digging and, you know, rooting around for the evidence, that my child would suffer the consequences, because he was in the care system voluntary. He got abused, and he, as an adult, then he went to the police, reported it, and sadly he died in the meantime in 2021. He died, and I've had to pick up the pieces. But it took 10 years from the start to a court, and we go in January to court, and for the hearing of just one abuser, because he was ready to name the other abusers, but sadly his police officer was on holiday, he was dealing with it, and she said, when I come off holiday, I'll come and see him, we'll do some more video evidence. But when she come back, he died. So
I know that you're worried that justice won't fully be done, and we'll do all that we can to support you.
Yeah.
You also said that you were concerned about perpetrators fleeing.
Right.
Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah. He's fled once during the inquiry into him, and when they arrested him, the police gave 7 recommendations to the judge, who one was to take his passport. The only recommendation they went with, the judge, was for him to live and sleep at a certain property. Now, this is a man that's fled once, and I do believe he is going to get a fake passport and flee the country again. I have informed the police, but they say, well, we're doing all we can, but it's not enough. And it's not enough that this inquiries and stuff is all about girls, because it's not just girls, and boys need to come forward. Lots of boys need to come forward, because I know it's happening. And it's not a thing that they have to be embarrassed about. They have to come forward, and it's not their fault.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And finally, Lucia.
Yeah, a lot of the work we've been doing and concerned around has been the lack of openness and transparency from this, and we're hoping this inquiry will give regular updates to restore the public trust and survivors trust more importantly, because we do believe that's at an all-time low. These survivors have been let down far too many times, and we've got to see real change with this inquiry now. We also want to see that it has the powers to refer new findings of new information that's brought forward, so that the inquiry itself can go to the police with those matters, and for it to liaise with the judicial system, because we want cases dealt with in a timely manner. Only last week, a local charity, COGS, in Manchester, Keeping Our Girls Safe, they took a survivor to the police. It took her years to get to this point that she wanted to go to the police, and she come forward to be told that she probably won't get a court hearing until 2028. So they live these experiences, and they're living and breathing it every day. It becomes their life, it becomes their being, and to finally get to that point where you want to come forward, to be told you've got years of waiting. And then we want to see a uniformed approach by the judges as well. We want to see the inquiry have that written in, that sentences are fitting, they're appropriate, because we've seen too many cases where we don't believe these sentences are fitting. And yeah, so we've just been more concerned around things like that, haven't we, Teresa?
Yeah.
Lucia, when we had the roundtable a few weeks back, you also talked about, I think you told me some stories about how the state failure was very blatant. I don't know if you recall the specific incident. Is it something that you might want to share? Because we want to make sure that the inquiry isn't just about perpetrators, but the full suite of institutions that might have let people down.
Yeah, there's a survivor that we're working with, and she's just been repeatedly let down by authorities. Her records go missing. She gets gaslit to an extreme where you think they can't be making survivors feel like they've gone crazy. They know what happened to them. They know their records, that they reported things. There's the NHS records go, and there's nobody bringing all this together to make sure that everything can be centralised and that survivors' information is kept safe.
Understood. Teresa, you had a similar experience as well with missing records and case files and so on.
Yeah, I've got some of my son's records, not all of them, and I know that some's missing. They've said that they'll give them to the solicitor, but the solicitor mustn't show me. But that's my child. I should be able to see what they've done with him, because they're now saying that there's no signs of him being groomed. Oldham Council are saying.
It was mentioned in my serious case review as well that big chunks of my care records were missing. I was a looked after child. There should have been a documentation for near enough every day that I was in care, whether it just be an acknowledgement of me going to school or waking up or anything that I did. But she found that there was months at a time where there was just not a single documentation within my records. So that seems to be common within a lot of cases, is missing records.
Right. And Marlon, did you want to add to that?
So unfortunately for Scarlett, she's not even got to any kind of full criminal investigation. We've been pushing for this for years, even though she's also been into care due to child sexual exploitation. Great Manchester Police haven't investigated it until the Channel 4 documentary. So they opened the investigation 4 weeks before that. What I find absolutely disgraceful is the only reason why we've got this case open is because of the media attention. What about the thousands of other survivors out there where no prosecutions? A lot of these girls that I'm speaking to, and this is common, there's no prosecutions at all.
I had to fight for mine. I didn't get mine willingly. I had to fight tooth and nail and expose people on the media just to get an investigation started. Mine had been documented and reported from 2008, and the serious case review noted 7 instances of assault, sexual assault or rape that were not investigated, and I had the police turn up in 2013 due to finding my name on a checklist in a perpetrator's house in relation to a different case, and they still didn't investigate when I told them everything then. So it took me exposing it to the media to get my case investigated in 2014, which led to prosecutions in 2019.
That's just unbelievable. And Lucia, I believe you had one more thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add into that we hope the inquiry would include some sort of specialised monitoring team, because we want someone to be dedicated to following up any recommendations that the inquiry finds, that they can feed back centrally and report back who locally hasn't been complying, because we find these local authorities, like I said, they're marking their own homework, and it's just that has got to change, and we need them to be accountable further up the ladder there, because this inquiry's got to create change, it's got to force change.
Thank you very much. And just before we go to media questions, I'm going to bring in Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phil, who has done a lot of work in this area and has set tests which we are going to have to make sure that the inquiry is successful and swift as well. Chris.
Thank you, Kemi. Well, look, just firstly, Marlon, Fiona, Teresa and Lucia, just to echo what Kemi said, thank you for your courage in fighting for the truth to come out. I know it's taken years and years. I know your lives have been ruined by the appalling abuse that happened. So just thank you for having the fortitude and the bravery to speak out on behalf of hundreds, and I think we think, in fact, thousands of young girls and boys as well who were abused. So thank you for what you've done by bringing this to public attention in the way you have. One of the things that struck me about this scandal isn't just that it happened in the first place, that the abuse occurred, and it's not just that the authorities were negligent and didn't investigate properly. It's that they deliberately and intentionally covered up these crimes. And I think actually Teresa touched on this when you said the police officers actually told you to stop complaining. They told you to leave it alone. And they said your son would suffer consequences unless you just stayed quiet. And yeah, exactly. And I've heard that so many times. I've heard about parents getting arrested for complaining. A case of a senior police officer in a northern city, a superintendent who ordered a retired officer who was working for a charity at the time to stop investigating because he was worried about so-called community tensions. So they deliberately covered this up. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate. So the first thing I think this inquiry must do is make sure the people who are responsible for covering this up, police officers, local council leaders and councillors, social services, even the Crown Prosecution Service in some cases, are held responsible. There's a criminal offence called misconduct in public office. In my view, many of these people that covered this up are guilty of that offence. They need to be prosecuted and, frankly, sent to prison. And that needs to happen, in my view, alongside the inquiry. It can't wait until afterwards. And, of course, at the same time, the many perpetrators, as Fiona said, who have escaped justice, need to be sent to prison and prosecuted as well. So I think that's the first thing, prosecuting those that covered this up for misconduct in public office. I think, secondly, we need to make sure this inquiry covers all 50 towns affected, not just some of them, but all of them. We know some towns like Bradford have refused to cooperate with any inquiry at all, even to this day, so all those places must be covered. All of the local inquiries must have statutory powers to compel the production of evidence, so the cover-up can't continue. This must be done in a timely way, so 2 years is as long as it should take. We can't have this dragging on for years and years. The survivors and their families have been suffering for long enough. And then critically, to Marlon's point, this needs to be done in a way that is genuinely independent. Councils like Bradford are still refusing to look at this. We can't trust those councils who have been covering this up actively for so many years to investigate themselves. It has to be independently led. They can't investigate themselves. The inquiry has to look at the role of ethnicity in the cover-up. Casey found that. And then finally, this needs to start soon. We need to see the terms of reference and a chair appointed by the summer recess, which is towards the end of July, about 4 or 5 weeks' time. And we need, as both Fiona and Lucia have said, we need survivors to be at the heart of this. They need to be consulted the whole time about how this inquiry is conducted and kept regularly updated. This has to be really driven by the survivors, not just imposed by central government. And those are the tests we're going to be holding the government to account for to make sure they actually do these things. And I think, listening to what I've heard said this morning, I think we're probably all on the same page when it comes to those principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Chris. I would now like to take questions from the media. I know that there will be some questions not specifically for me or Chris, but for survivors and family members. But if you could please direct those questions to me first, and then I will ask them. And I'd like to start with Charlie Peters of GB News, who has done quite a lot of work on this topic. Charlie.
Good morning. Yes, as you said, I'm going to spare Lucia, Teresa, Fiona and Marl on the questions. I'd rather grill the politicians on this one. You've put forward those tests, Kemi and Chris, that you're going to hold the government to account on with this inquiry. But it seems to me in your list, Chris, that you are missing out Whitehall and Westminster. Will you ensure that they are investigated as well? We've heard compelling evidence about civil servants covering up abuse. Will you put forward an amendment or take other action to ensure that people in Westminster, including the CPS, are also dragged before this commission?
So my view is that the inquiry needs to go where the evidence leads. If there is evidence that there are institutions, whether they're national or local, have been complicit in a cover-up, then that definitely needs to be looked at. No one should be should be left on the side and left outside. This is a full national inquiry. So I don't believe that any institution should be out of scope. If there is evidence pointing, credible evidence pointing to any institution, then that should be looked at. But we know that quite a lot has come out already. This is why we didn't need to wait 6 months to agree a national inquiry. Most of what was in Baroness Casey's report, which I welcome, I felt I'd seen before and I knew. And what we need right now is the moral courage to just do the right thing rather than continually finding reasons to kick stuff into the long grass. And that's what I really want to see. Thank you. Tamara Cohen from Sky News.
Thank you, Tamara Cohen from Sky News, and thanks to the survivors for those very powerful stories. Kemi, you say that there's been a cover-up here. Louise Casey's review made clear that that's been going on for many, many years. And for a lot of those years, the previous Conservative government were in power and you held several senior ministerial positions. Do the Conservatives owe survivors an apology for not doing more as a lot of this emerged over many years?
Well, this is one of the things that I mentioned when I first started, that we did a lot, and the more we did, the more we realised that even more needed to be done. My brief didn't cover this area. I was Women and Equalities Minister. I had a separate scandal that I was looking at, this Tavistock scandal. We got that clinic closed. Very similar, very, very similar themes, a cover-up, people being shouted down and called names for pointing out something that was harming young children. That's the sort of thing that we're seeing here. And these are the issues that really get my blood going. And that's why we are very focused on getting a national inquiry. There were issues, for instance, with Conservative politicians being criticised when we highlighted that ethnicity should be looked at. I remember in 2018, Sajid Javid saying that there was a serious problem within the Asian community. He talked about Pakistani grooming gangs, and he was vilified for it. He was attacked. The same thing happened to Suella Braverman not that long ago. So what we now need is to move on from the place where those who are raising issues are being called racist or far right or whatever, and actually start focusing on the victims. And that's the work that we're focused on today. Thank you. Damien Grammaticus from BBC.
Yes, so a question for the politicians. Ms Badenoch, I noticed in reply to that answer from Sky News, you didn't offer an apology. I mean, you are on a panel right now with survivors. Your government you were in part of a government that was in office for a long time and didn't implement reports. You could take the opportunity now to express to those survivors an apology for what happened.
Yes, but we have done that. I mean, I have spoken. This is not the first time that I'm meeting the survivors. I have spoken to them about this. I have apologised. But what I find extraordinary is that more people are interested in prosecuting a government that did some things, did not conclude, rather than looking at what needs to happen right now. What I'm really worried about is that we're spending a lot of time bringing the politics back into this when we want to take the politics out of it. I have spoken to survivors, and what they're talking about right now is a full national inquiry. No one here has asked me for more apologies. They have heard the apologies. Apologies are easy. Apologies are easy. What we need to see is action. We can sit here and say sorry all day long, but what I actually want to see is an inquiry that gets to the bottom of this. When I found out that there were 50 towns And we found out about 4,000 new victims last year, 807 perpetrators. I just could not believe the scale of this. No one has joined the dots. That's what we're talking about now. We set up a gangs task force. We set up previous inquiries, ICSA. We even had Louise Casey do a report specifically. I can't remember whether it was Rotherham or Oldham, but so much activity has taken place, and yet still this is going on. And we need to bring a final end to it. And that's what I'm most focused on. But does anyone around the table have anything that they would like to say on that point specifically? Because I know that I'm being asked, but you may have things to add.
I think we are where we are. There's been failings of successive governments back from even before Tony Blair. This isn't a new issue. There has been failings from all different angles, but we are here, we are where we are today, and right now this is an opportunity for MPs to start doing what is right irrespective of the parties. Apologies, they come and they go. I want the truth now. I want people to stop telling me that I've done something wrong. I want to be backed not just by my government but by my communities and by the media and everyone to do what is right, and I want progress to come from this. We can sit and we can argue over how quick we should have got here. Everyone knows we should have got here quicker, and I don't think anyone's ever going to deny that. But we cannot change that now. We can change the future, though, and we can make progress from here if we put things aside and we all start moving forward and the victims become the centre focus of this.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Lucia.
Yeah, just to echo there what Fiona's saying, but we're in the here and now, and when you speak to survivors, they want to move forward. We can't keep regressing over who's not done what, pointing the fingers, and this has got to stop being used as a stick to beat each other over the head with. It's about moving forward, and it's about moving forward together, because it should be one voice on this, because there is only one right answer to this issue. So, and everybody needs to be on the same page with it, no matter, you know, rosettes should be stripped away, and everybody should be on the same page.
Thank you very much, Lucia.
Ms Badenoch, sorry, I was going to add, I mean, what you've heard there, though, Baroness Casey said exactly that she thinks the time is now for politicians to say they back this inquiry, they back the government, they will support it. Will you say that?
Yes, that is something that we've already said. That's why we've welcomed her report. Of course we back it. We've been calling for this for 6 months. We've been voting on it multiple times. So it's not a secret that we back a full national inquiry. Thank you. Shihab Khan from ITV.
Shihab Khan here from ITV News. I want to build on the last two questions ever so slightly. We've heard from the victims today about how they've felt so let down. Baroness Casey did say, as both my predecessors have just asked, that successive governments, including the ones you served in, failed when it came to dealing with this. When addressing the now and not looking back, but do you believe the actions and decisions of the governments that you served in should be thoroughly investigated? And a quick second question, if I may. Two Labour MPs have tabled rival amendments to the Crime and Policing Bill with the aim of decriminalising abortion. Is that something that you'll be supporting?
So, as I said to Charlie, there should be no stone left unturned. Where there is evidence, that should be looked at. The actions that we have seen over the last 30 years have shown that work has been done, but that work was not enough. But this inquiry, in my view, needs to look at those institutions that actively covered stuff up. Not just maybe work was done but not completed, or some things weren't looked at. We are talking about those who hid evidence, those who asked victims to go away, those who told people that what they were saying was not true. That is a completely different order of magnitude to any sort of state failure that we have seen. This is why we say that this is one of the biggest scandals this country has ever seen. It wasn't just that these perpetrators went on for so long. It was that there were institutions that turned a blind eye and actively, as the survivors and their families have been telling us, and actively told them that they didn't want to hear from them. Andy Bell, Channel 5. Today we're talking about grooming gangs, but thank you. I will answer those questions when the time comes. Andy Bell.
Thank you, Andy Bell, 5 News. We've heard people saying that politics should be put aside now. Do you undertake, as leader of the opposition, to put politics aside in addressing this issue? And with that in mind, do you regret slightly the tone that you took yesterday with the Home Secretary and the Commons?
Oh, I do think that we should take the politics out of it. But who was it that said when we raised this issue that we were pandering to the far right? That's what brought the politics into it. Who was it that said that this was dog whistle politics? It was Keir Starmer and his ministers. So it is, on the one hand, extraordinary to hear those accusations, and then when we defend ourselves, are then accused of bringing the politics into it. And as leader of the opposition, it is my job to make sure that the government is held to account. They voted against the national inquiry 3 times. And as they were voting against it, they were calling us names for doing what they have now accepted they have to do. That needs to be brought out. But we do that in the House of Parliament. We are politicians. Politics is what we do. But right now, I am here on a platform with survivors. I'm not doing politics now. When I'm in the Houses of Parliament, when I'm in the Commons, I will do politics. And I think that it is wrong for people to tone police those who are pointing out when something has gone wrong. That is what happened to Sajid Javid when he was talking about ethnicity. That is what happened to Suella Braverman. That is what happened to many people who were bringing up these cases. I remember hearing one survivor say that they reported that an Asian man had taken their son, and the police were more interested in the language she used and said that she couldn't describe him as that was racist. That's what really worries me. That's what really worries me. Does anyone want to come in on any of the other questions that were asked?
I would, please.
Yes, ma'am.
I still think politics needs to be involved because a lot of the cover-ups, in my experience, are locally rather than nationally. So it first comes to local authorities. We still need, I don't trust Labour one bit. I've met with Jess Phillips. I've been campaigning for this for the last few years, and I've just had the door closed in my face. I do not trust them. So they still need challenging. Like I said, there's more questions than answers. So if nobody's going to question them.
And the fact is, just because an inquiry has been announced doesn't mean that the pressure can be taken off. If we take the pressure off, the inquiry has the possibility to fall apart again, and then it's another failing. Pressure does need to stay on, and the framework needs to be scrutinised by people that are in a position to be able to do that. I think more importantly about the politics being taken out is that they will work together. That doesn't mean that where necessary things shouldn't be challenged. It should still be challenged and it should still be scrutinised.
I think that's a very important point and a really important distinction, that we as politicians have a job to do in making sure that the government is held to account, and where it's government politicians that the job is done properly. But if every time we are pointing things out and doing our job, we're accused of politicising something that needs to be heard, it makes it a lot harder. And we'll do all we can to ensure that the survivors and their families who aren't political, no one here is political, are kept out of that. But we have a job to do, and it's really important that we do the job that we've been elected to do, because if we don't do our jobs, that's when these scandals get worse. That's when they go on for a long period of time. We have to make sure that people have the freedom to speak and explain what has gone wrong, and we have to make sure that we do all of this as transparently as possible so that the public can come to their own conclusions. Do we have any more questions from the room? Jason Gross?
Microphone. Jason Gross from the Daily Mail. Mrs. Badenoch, one line in Baroness Casey's report, which did seem new yesterday, was the assertion that in a lot of the live police cases that they're looking at, they found a significant proportion of asylum seekers and foreign-born citizens. I wonder if you think that this is becoming a border issue, border control issue, as well as being a criminal justice issue. And if I could just ask the survivors and the families as well, thank you for your stories. There have been suggestions that this inquiry will only look at maybe half a dozen local areas. You're all from different parts of the country. If this inquiry ends up not looking at the area that you're from or your loved ones are from, could you ever be satisfied with it?
Right. I think my answer to your first question is yes. I think this does go into borders beyond criminal justice. I'll let Chris briefly on that, because he's been doing quite a lot of work on this, and then I'll bring survivors in on the second question.
Yes, it is a border security issue. This year so far has been the worst in history for illegal immigration across the English Channel. The government has no idea who the people are coming in, what their previous records are, as we saw last week, we know the vast majority are young men. And the fact that Louise Casey in her report identifies that significant numbers, that's the word she used, significant numbers of perpetrators are asylum seekers who entered the country generally illegally or non-UK nationals, does show that the lack of control at the border is fueling the risk here.
And on the second question about the scale of the inquiry and how many places will be looked at, does anyone want to, Marlon?
Yeah. So, one of the things with Tameside, where I live, we've got similar figures of child sexual exploitation to Oldham. I haven't campaigned for Tameside. I could have done. I campaigned nationally because I don't believe Tameside is anywhere different from anywhere else in the country. So we can't just have half a dozen or a dozen. Yeah. Everywhere where there's information of grooming going on needs to be investigated. And I know a lot of people are saying it needs to be quick and that. I don't think it needs to be quick. I think it needs to be thorough. That's the most important bit.
You know?
I think the inquiries need to go where the evidence leads them, no matter how many towns and cities that ends up meaning it approaches. I fully believe that Bradford needs to be part of that because the figures that you have seen in places in the previous inquiries are completely outnumbered by the scale of it in Bradford, and it would be so important to look at a place with such levels to be able to gain inside knowledge. And that's not just me advocating because that's where I'm from, that's because what the evidence is suggesting going forward. And I agree that the inquiry needs to be thorough and probably ongoing because the crime is constantly evolving. I think that we need to be focusing on the failings, but then there needs to be something set up ongoing to constantly review as the information is developing. So a national framework database where someone is in charge of reviewing that going forward to keep up with the evolution of the crime. So, yeah.
I'd like to add to that. So, I live in Greater Manchester. Bradford isn't that close. Scarlett was regularly taken to Bradford. That town constantly comes up. Not with just my daughter, but with other survivors. And I do believe that Bradford should be the priority. That's where they should start now.
Agreed. Camilla Tominey. Well, I believe this is yet another example of state failure and institutional failure. That should never have happened. There seemed to be either a lack of understanding from many of the people looking at this into what was going on, or a complete lack of sympathy. I believe the report actually does reference this issue and talks about clearing those records. Do you want to say more on that?
Yeah,
please?
I mean, Camilla, I completely agree. Your vulnerable young girls who were caught up in this should not be criminalised at all. There was a terrible case, I think it was around about 2010, where the Crown Prosecution Service designated a victim as a so-called co-conspirator. The Crown Prosecution Service, a national body to a previous question, treated a victim as a co-conspirator. In that case last week, where there were 7 convictions, there was a report connected to that said a social worker at the time, this I think was in Rochdale between 2001 and 2006, they branded a 10-year-old girl as a prostitute. That is the kind of attitude that was prevalent. It's absolutely disgusting. The people who did that should be held to account. And if any of those victims were convicted, then those convictions need to be looked at again, overturned.
When I was 15, I was described as being the ringleader of the abuse when I was in a house with adults aged between 22 and 44. And I was 15-year-old. I was constantly referred to as stuff like that, and I was referred to as running a brothel at 16 and 17-year-old. The the focus has constantly been on these victims, and the stigma then attached with them has impacted lives. And where damage has been done, people now have a responsibility to fix that damage. It cannot be forgotten and it cannot be moved on from, because people's lives have been severely impacted by this and they deserve to have the damage fixed.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I know that I need to bring the press conference to a close. Is there anything that any of the survivors and family members would like to say before we do that?
I've said loads.
Okay. Teresa?
No,
Lucia?
thank you.
We just want the scope of the inquiry to be able to have sufficient police in there, you know, so things can run smoothly and get the right justice for the survivors. So we need a dedicated policing team and monitoring team, in my opinion.
Actually, I have got something to add now. You've just triggered something. So I have got concerns over the fact that a lot of the sentences, obviously we all know that some of the sentences have been really short anyway, but then there's an added thing of it that they are automatically released after 50% of their sentences, and that needs addressing. People, not just that have been convicted of the grooming gang crimes, but rape in general should not be up for automatic release after 50% of their sentences. It should be on a case-by-case basis, because when I sat in that courtroom and they got 16 to 20-year sentences, and now I'm finding out that after 6.5 years they're going to be soon eligible for Cat D prisons and day releases, that is disheartening, and that is justice getting stripped back away.
Fiona, that's a really, really critical point to end on. What we want is justice, and so much has been said and done on this issue, but I do believe that this is one of the greatest scandals our country has ever seen. We will support the government in this endeavour. We do need to see something that is thorough, as Marlon said, but justice delayed is justice denied. They cannot take too long. They must move as quickly as possible. They must follow the evidence. And if the inquiry is able to do that, I think we'll finally be able to say that we have done right by many of the victims who have waited too long for us to get here. Thank you very much, everybody.